The wind carried a dry whisper across the New Mexico plains that night, stirring dust against the wooden posts of Samuel Grady's ranch. He stood at the edge of his porch with a lantern in hand, the flames swaying against the dark. His land stretched out endless, a sea of pale grass and scattered mesquite trees. It was land bought with sweat, bullets, and the kind of solitude only a man like him could survive. That solitude was broken by the sound of hooves. He narrowed his eyes, resting his hand on the rifle leaning against the porch. The night swallowed shapes and spat them out distorted. But the figures moving toward him were not warriors. They were women, 12 of them. Their silhouettes were gaunt, some leaning heavily against ponies too weak to carry them much farther. The closer they came, the clearer the truth pressed itself against him. They were Apache women, and they were starving. One stumbled from her mount before reaching the fence line. Another clutched a child wrapped in tattered hide, its cries thin and desperate. Samuel's jaw tightened. He had seen this before: refugees from raids, survivors of hunger. The territory was cruel, but crueler still were men who left women and children to wander in it. They stopped just short of his fence, the faint glow of his lantern lighting hollow cheeks and eyes carved by suffering. None spoke, none dared. It was the eldest, a woman with streaks of gray in her hair and a stare sharp as flint, who finally raised her voice. "Shelter?" she said in halting English. "One night. Just one." The weight of the request pressed heavier than any bullet. Samuel glanced at the horizon. He knew what it meant. Where there were Apache women, Apache men would follow. To harbor them was to invite danger that came on horseback with arrows and rifles in hand. He could send them away. No one would question him for it. He could let the desert finish what hunger had started. But as the lantern flickered against the woman's face, Samuel saw something that cut deeper than fear. Dignity stripped bare, a strength that refused to die even when everything else had been taken. "Bring them in," he muttered, pulling open the gate. The women moved like shadows into his yard, some helping others across the dust. Samuel guided them toward the barn. He spread hay into crude bedding, fetched water from the pump, and laid out what little food he had. Cornbread, dried beans, and jerky supplies meant to last him through the month, gone in one evening. The women ate silently, each bite too precious for words. The child at the breast of the youngest woman suckled weakly, eyes half closed with exhaustion. Samuel stood in the corner of the barn, arms crossed, watching them. Part of him wondered if he was a fool. Another part, the part he rarely listened to, told him this was the first right thing he'd done in years. As the barn settled into uneasy silence, Samuel returned to the porch. The stars burned bright above, cold and watchful. He sat with his rifle across his knees, listening to the night. Every creak of the wood, every rustle of the grass felt heavier. Hours passed. The lantern burned low. Samuel fought sleep until his eyes betrayed him. And then the sound came. Distant, at first so faint it could have been whined through the canyon. But it grew, steady and relentless. The ground seemed to carry it, a vibration that crept into his bones. Hooves, many of them. Samuel rose slowly, gripping the rifle. He walked to the edge of the fence and looked out into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing. Then the horizon shifted, a ripple against the stars. Shadows moving in unison. Riders. He tightened his grip on the rifle and glanced toward the barn. Inside, 12 women lay hidden, the fragile secret he had chosen to protect. But out there was the consequence of that choice, galloping closer with every heartbeat. By the time the first glow of dawn touched the sky, Samuel could count them. Not 10, not 50, 300 Apache warriors. And they were all waiting at his fence. The first light of morning broke across the plains, staining the horizon in hues of blood and gold. Samuel Grady had not moved from the porch. His rifle sat heavy in his hands, but his eyes were fixed on the line of riders stretching across the land like a black wall. 300 Apache warriors on horseback, their silhouettes rising and falling with the restless stamping of hooves. The ground trembled beneath their weight. Dust hung in the air. catching the morning light, turning them into phantoms. Each warrior carried the marks of war bows slung across backs, rifles gleaming, spears upright like the teeth of some colossal beast. Samuel's mouth was dry. He had faced men before, rustlers, drifters, even soldiers. But this was no drunken gunfight in a saloon, no border skirmish where numbers could be evened out by luck. This was an army. Behind him, the barn was silent. The women knew. They had felt the hoofbeats too. He didn't turn to look at them, but he felt their eyes on his back, waiting to see whether the man who had given them bread and water would now betray them with silence. One warrior urged his horse forward. He was tall, his face painted in streaks of red and black, hair braided with eagle feathers. His chest bore scars old and new, and the weight of command hung on him like armor. The others shifted as he rode forward, their eyes fixed on Samuel. The leader stopped at the fence, so close Samuel could see the morning sun catch in his eyes. Eyes that held neither rage nor mercy, only judgment. The warrior spoke in his tongue first, words rolling like distant thunder. Then, switching to broken English, he said, "You have our women." Samuel shifted his stance, the rifle still in his hands but angled downward. His voice came slow, steady, though inside his chest his heart hammered like a war drum. "They came to me last night, hungry, cold. I gave them shelter, nothing more." The warrior's gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then he said something in Apache, and a murmur spread through the ranks. Some laughed bitterly. Others looked toward the barn with hard, suspicious eyes. "You lie," the leader finally said. "White men do not give without taking." The accusation struck like a lash. Samuel straightened, his jaw tightening. He had lived long enough to know what men were capable of, men in uniform. Men with whiskey on their breath, men who wore crosses while burning villages. He knew the warrior had reason to doubt, but he also knew that his silence would damn him. "You think I touched them?" Samuel's voice dropped low, anger threading through it. "Then ask them yourself." The leader's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on the reins. After a tense moment, he raised his arm and barked a command. Two younger warriors dismounted, moving toward the barn with swift, purposeful strides. Samuel tensed, lifting his rifle a fraction. The leader's eyes flicked to him, sharp as a drawn blade. "If you raise that gun, you die," the leader said flatly. Samuel's knuckles whitened on the wood, but he lowered it. He could not fight 300 men, not for pride. The barn doors creaked open, and the women were led out into the pale morning light. Their faces were tired, their bodies stiff, but they stood tall. The eldest, the woman with gray-streaked hair and unbroken eyes, stepped forward. She spoke rapidly in her tongue, her words strong despite exhaustion. Samuel couldn't understand, but he watched the way the warriors listened, the shift in their faces. Some nodded, others looked uneasy. When she finished, the leader dismounted slowly. Dust rose around his boots as he walked toward her. His presence was overwhelming, like a storm given flesh. He stood before the woman, speaking in a low voice Samuel couldn't catch. Then she pointed towards Samuel. The leader's gaze turned to the rancher once more. "You gave them food?" "I did." "Water?" "Yes." The leader studied him, as if trying to peel away the skin and see what lay beneath. Then he asked the question Samuel had dreaded since the moment the women appeared at his gate. "Why?" It was not suspicion in his voice now, but something deeper. Confusion, even grief. Samuel looked out across the endless line of warriors, then back to the women huddled together. The child whimpered in its mother's arms. He thought of the desert night, of the hunger in their eyes, of the way his barn had felt less empty with them inside. "Because no one else would," Samuel said finally. His voice cracked with honesty, stripped of all armor. "Because I've seen what happens when men turn their backs, and I'm tired of watching it." The words hung heavy in the air. The warriors shifted uneasily. The leader's expression remained carved from stone. But something flickered in his eyes, something Samuel could not name. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the restless stomping of horses. Then the leader stepped closer, his shadow falling across the fence. "You gave shelter to those we could not reach," he said at last. "For that, you live." The relief that washed over Samuel was sharp and sudden, like the gasp after nearly drowning. But it did not last, because the leader's next words cut just as deep. "But the debt is not finished. By sunrise tomorrow, you will stand before the council. You will answer for what you have done not only to us, but to the land itself." Samuel's breath caught. He did not know what the council meant or what judgment awaited him there, but he knew one thing with certainty. His choice last night had changed everything. The leader mounted his horse again. With a gesture, the warriors began to withdraw, their formation unraveling into the dust. But not all left. A dozen remained behind, circling the fence like wolves, guardians or executioners. Samuel lowered his rifle, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. He turned back toward the barn, where the women waited, their eyes locked on him with a mixture of fear and hope. And in that moment, as the sun climbed higher, Samuel understood that whatever awaited him tomorrow was no longer just about survival. It was about redemption. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Samuel did not sleep. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the warriors who lingered beyond his fence. They did not speak to him, nor to one another. They simply watched, silent, unmoving, their eyes glinting like embers in the dying firelight. Inside the barn, the women had settled. A few slept, their breathing soft and ragged. The eldest kept to the shadows, murmuring prayers in her tongue, while the mother of the child held her little one close, rocking slowly as though her arms alone could shield it from the storm gathering outside. Samuel lit one last lantern as night gave way to the gray chill of morning. The air was heavy with the promise of judgment. By the time the sun's first rays touched the land, the warriors stirred. One rode forward and pointed toward the horizon. Without a word, Samuel knew it was time. He saddled his horse with slow, deliberate hands. The animal shifted nervously, sensing the unease of its master. Samuel tied his rifle across the saddle but left the chamber empty. He did not plan to fight. Not because he had lost the will, but because he understood that this was not a battle that could be won with bullets. The women watched him mount. The eldest woman stepped forward, her hand lightly touching his stirrup. Her eyes searched his face with a sadness he could not translate. For a moment, Samuel thought she was about to speak, but instead she only nodded once, solemn and final, as if to say, "Whatever happens, you have already done what most would not." The warriors led him eastward. The ride stretched long and silent, the only sound the rhythm of hooves against the earth. Samuel's mind wandered with every mile back to his younger days in Texas, when he had watched soldiers burn homes and drive families from their land. He had not spoken then. He had looked away, convincing himself it was none of his concern. Now, years later, the weight of those silences pressed heavier than the rifle on his back. By mid-morning, they reached the council grounds. It was a hollow encircled by stone bluffs, the earth scorched by old fires. Warriors lined the rim above like sentinels, their faces grave. In the center, seated in a wide half-circle, were the elders. Their hair was long and braided with silver. Their faces carried lines carved by grief, wisdom, and unyielding time. The leader from the morning, the storm-eyed warrior, stood among them, his posture rigid with authority. He raised a hand, and the murmurs around the hollow quieted. Then he spoke. "This man took our women into his house." His voice carried across the space, sharp and resonant. Some say he gave shelter. Others say he took what was not his. We will judge. A ripple passed through the crowd. Samuel dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the dust. He stood tall, though his chest felt hollow. One elder leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "Why?" he asked in perfect English. The same question as before. Why would a white rancher risk everything for Apache women? Samuel swallowed, his throat dry as bone. "Because they were starving. Because I had bread, and they had none. Because I could not close the door on them and sleep easy." The elder's gaze did not waver. Many men would have closed the door. "Yes," Samuel admitted. "I know, I have been one of them before. But not this time." His words seemed to ripple through the circle, some faces hardening, others softening with thought. The storm-eyed leader stepped forward. "And if soldiers come looking for them? If they burn your ranch for this?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "Then let them come. A home can be rebuilt. A man can't rebuild his soul once it's gone." Silence fell. Even the wind seemed to pause, caught in the weight of the words. Another elder, her voice like wind through dry grass, spoke next. "You fed them. You gave water. But did you touch them? Did you claim them as your right?" Samuel's head snapped up. His voice cracked with fury, though he fought to keep it steady. "No, I am not that kind of man." The eldest woman from the barn suddenly stepped forward from the shadows. She had followed the warriors here, her shawl drawn tightly against the morning air. She began to speak rapidly in her language, her hands moving with urgency. Though Samuel could not understand, he caught fragments, the tone of defense, the rhythm of truth. When she finished, the elder who had first questioned him nodded slowly. He turned to the circle. "She says he gave bread, gave water, and nothing more. That he treated them as daughters, not prizes. That when she feared he would close the door, he opened it wider instead." The murmurs grew louder now, but different, less suspicion, more reflection. The storm-eyed leader looked at Samuel for a long, heavy moment. Then he said, "You speak of a man's soul. Perhaps you mean it. Perhaps you do not. But these women speak for you, and so does the child they carry. For that, the council spares you." Relief hit Samuel like rain on parched soil. His knees nearly buckled, but he held himself upright. Yet the leader wasn't finished. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Samuel could hear. "Do not mistake mercy for trust. One good act does not erase 100 wrongs done by your people. You carry their shadow whether you want it or not. But today, you chose differently. Remember that choice." Samuel met his gaze and nodded once. "I will." The council rose, signaling the decision was final. The warriors around the rim began to disperse, their voices rising like wind through dry leaves. The storm that had gathered for so long was breaking. The eldest woman approached Samuel once more. This time, she pressed something into his hand, a small woven band, colored with red and black patterns. He looked down at it, confused. "It is nothing," the interpreter elder explained. "And it is everything. A mark that you did not turn your back when others would have." Samuel closed his fist around the band. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest, not pride, not triumph, but the quiet ache of redemption. When he mounted his horse to ride back home, the women followed in silence, their steps lighter than before. The warriors no longer ringed his land as enemies. They lingered only as watchful shadows, guardians on the horizon. That night, when Samuel sat once more on his porch beneath the endless sky, the land felt different. Not safer, not gentler, but changed. Because sometimes, in a world built on cruelty and suspicion, one act of kindness was enough to turn strangers into witnesses and enemies into something less certain. Stories like Samuel Grady's remind us that compassion is never wasted, even when it carries risk. In times of division, suspicion, and fear, it takes courage to open a door instead of closing it. And though history may be written with violence, moments of mercy can echo louder than war. If this story moved you, share it with others, because remembering the past is how we keep from repeating it. And if you want more forgotten tales of sacrifice, redemption, and the human spirit tested against impossible odds, don't forget to follow for the next story.